Welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast. Here is Munir Elazouzi from easymedicaldevice.com, and today we will help you when you will have to do some tests for your medical devices. And today I have with me Michael Wetherington, who is the founder of medregs.com, and he will help us really to go through that. So Michael, welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast.
Thank you, Munir, for having me in your podcast. I'm Michael Wetherington, and I am the founder of medicalregs.com. And Munir had invited me to participate in this podcast to hopefully help some of you manufacturers out there, medical device manufacturers, to prepare your product, starting from design all the way through product safety certification. So I'm going to let Munir ask me the questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you.
No problem. So Michael, so first, where are you located exactly?
I am currently in the Philippines, but my company is based in the US. And pretty much I've been here for a little while, but I do go back and forth. And for right now, since the pandemic, I'm sort of stuck a little bit where I'm at right now. So in the right time, I guess I'll go back to the States and spend a few months there and come back again here.
No problem. Yeah, I suppose that due to the pandemic, a lot of people were stuck somewhere and prefer maybe to stay at their family home instead of being stuck in the US or at office.
Well, the latest news in the US also, you see the number of cases. So yeah, I think it's probably worse for me to go back there at this time than here. Although the cases here is rising, but it's nowhere near the number.
I think it's terrible what's happening in the US. No, it's really terrible what is happening. So I hope everybody stays safe. So keep social distancing and try really to stay safe with your family also. So I think it's really the great thing to do. Okay, so Michael, so as you mentioned, so we are talking a lot on this podcast about some legislation, regulations, so things that people have to follow in terms of regulations. Last podcast we had also Leo Eisner, where we talked about the IEC 6601 about medical device electrical equipments. During this podcast, we talked also about some tests that people should be doing for electrical equipments. And here I want really to come back to the foundation or the basics for people. So to see how they will have to go through their process, if I can say, to find which test they have to do to execute the test and everything. So, but maybe my first question to you is why manufacturers or medical device manufacturers should perform some tests for their device? Why cannot they just send their device to the market like that?
Well, there are two benefits to that. One is that while you're developing your devices, it's only a good idea that you apply those requirements. So from design, you incorporate all the requirements, then perform some tests, basic tests along your product development, so that when you submit it for formal certification, you'll have a pretty high confidence that you have designed and that the test results that the test lab will perform on will be satisfactory. Also, another driving force behind doing that is that certain markets require you to have a certification mark on your device. So that's going beyond FDA regulatory MDR. So for example, in the United States, you not only have to meet the FDA, but you are forced, though not mandatory, but you're almost forced based on the economic operators to have a certification mark such as UL, Intertech, or ETL on your device. So that's what's driving that. So you have to identify the standards that apply to you, incorporate it into your design, and perform as many tests as you can. Because I'm aware that not all manufacturers have the test equipment to perform some tests. But I think the basic, you can get that done through some rental equipment, and so you'll have an idea whether you have a big margin or a narrow margin, and which would determine your success when you actually submit it for testing through formal testing. Yeah. So it's a good preparatory work. You design to the standards. You first identify what standards apply. You incorporate the requirements into your design. You do some testing, basic tests, and then you choose your testing lab for who you want to certify your device.
No, it's clear. So we have, if I can say, some mandatory actions to do because some regulators are asking that. But how can you help me just to understand, or can you help the audience to understand how can I know which test I should do? For example, as we said for the electrical equipment, so if you know, if I can say the regulation, you know that IEC 6601 is mainly the basis for your testings, but if I'm not specifically talking about a medical device, electrical equipment, and there is other tests to do, so how can I know which test to do? So do you have some kind of method or pathway that the manufacturers have to go through so they select the right test to be done?
Yeah, actually, it all goes back to starting it off right. So you have a medical device that you want to develop. Based on your conceptual idea or early design stage, you should be able to identify what standards would apply to you. And knowing by reading the scope of each of the standards that you identify will determine whether it gets fed through your design inputs, right? So for example, like you mentioned, IEC 6601, you have to read the scope of that. If you fall within that scope, then you design to the requirements of that. Then what I also recommend is that, for having been in the R&D side of medical device, what I used to do is I have this master list of all the regulatory requirements and then standards across all target markets. So that I have that on a spreadsheet. And based on the specific product that we want to launch, I can pinpoint which regulatory requirements or standards that apply for each target markets. And then once we narrow it down, we go inside the standards and we go through a checklist. So we pretty much do what the test lab will do. We go clause by clause. Okay, this applies, that doesn't apply because I don't have an internal battery, or this doesn't apply because of whatever reason, but this applies. And it all goes down through the point of identifying what test applies also. So you need some examples that most active medical electrically powered equipment will have to do tested for is a high-pot test, leakage currents. Those are your key basic tests that are coming out of the 6601 series. And then you can get into the electromagnetics compatibility when you're talking about the collateral standards. So you would have to pretty much do what the testing lab does, at least checking it constructionally. So it's a two-stage process what the test lab will do. They'll check the construction to see if you have the right components, you connected your wires correctly, you mounted all your different components correctly, using the right insulation. And then you get into the testing side of the standard, whether, okay, this doesn't apply because I don't have this. This applies because I have this. So it goes through that. And take note that not all manufacturers will have the complete set of test equipment to perform all of the tests. But some of the basic, like leakage currents, high-pot tests, those are the things that will give you an idea whether you're gonna pass the test with high margin or not. So it is always a good idea even if you have to rent out some of the test equipment as a one-time use throughout your development, then do that, because it will give you a higher confidence whether you're gonna, before you submit. It's just not submitting it blindfoldedly and just praying that you will pass. No, there's better ways of doing that, and one way is to checking it yourself, performing as much as you can what the test lab will do to your device as part of their certification. So
no, I think
that's a key thing I try to point out to a lot of manufacturers, MedTech startups especially.
No, I think it's great, but in terms of laboratories, so can they also be a good source of information for which test to do for my device, or they are here just to execute and not helping you at all for saying that maybe it's not the right one or it's the wrong test here?
What you will find, Munir, is that the accredited testing laboratories who certified medical devices, they have to be impartial. So they stay away from consulting. Okay. They cannot tell you, this test applies or this thing will fail. You have to fix it this way. No, it's a conflict for them. So you would have to seek consultants that are not certifying your device to get that input that you need to, even as far as what test applies to your device or not, or if you discover a failure as part of your pre-compliance test, you can seek that consultant's advice to correct that, whether it be a ground leakage current problem or electromagnetics compatibility problem. So testing labs are off limits with regards to consultation. They strictly do certification. They cannot offer advice or a design consultation.
I think it's great because I compare them also maybe to notified bodies that are here just to certify you and not to provide you any advice, or any consulting specifically. But in terms of laboratories, then, so how can I mean, should I go to any laboratory that is accredited, or there is some kind of methodology to select the right one for me and the right one for my test, so that I can be confident that they will be doing a great job? So is accreditation kind of a good marketing name for them to say, I'm accredited, so I'm really the right laboratory for you? Or it's like, no, there is more to look at?
There is more to look at, and that's a very good question. And I think many are still confused about that. Testing labs accreditation is just one area that you need to look at, and accreditations vary from country to region or country to country. So, for example, the best way to explain this is, for example, in the United States, testing laboratories that are accredited by OSHA, which is a governing agency in the US, they accredit testing labs similar to the notified body that's accredited by the competent authorities in the EU. So in the US, you would need to use those testing labs that have been accredited for the United States by the agency, which is the OSHA government agent, federal agency. So you have to seek those specific ones, and then you have to narrow that. Not all accreditations are the same. Some labs are accredited for specific standards or product category. So just because it says accredited testing lab, or an NRTL, which is the acronym for accredited testing lab in the US, it doesn't necessarily mean they're actually accredited for the specific standard that you need. So you have to look deeper into that. You can either ask them directly, are you accredited as an NRTL for 6601, US version of that? They can either say yes or no. So if not, you can do your own research through the OSHA NRTL website, where you can actually see each of the accredited testing labs within the United States to see what they have been accredited for in terms of product categories and standards. So yeah, so there are qualifications other than accreditations that you have to look at. So it's geographically different for each accredited bodies. So for example, a notified body cannot test a medical device for certify it and have it used in the United States. No, there are two primary reasons. The accreditations are different. The US voltages and frequencies are different from EU. So that's one of the things but there are certification schemes that you can go through, so that irrespective of how many markets you have, that in most cases, the CB scheme, it's a CB scheme that actually allows you to test your device by one of the members in that scheme and consider all of the national deviations for your target markets. So that once you comply with that testing, the idea is that you only have to test once. There are some instances that the other countries may request for testing, but as part of the scheme, that they're supposed to accept each other's test results. So for example, UL has tested my product for US as the originating member of the NCB, then I can take that test report and apply it to Australia for the RCM mark, for their, for their mark. Okay, UL, which is an NCB, is part of the CB scheme. They've done the testing on this. I can look at the test results, and if everything looks good, then you can apply this RCM mark for product safety, EMC mark for Australia. And same goes for other regions. So there are different schemes or compliance paths that you can take based on your target markets. So it's very important that you choose the lab that has the correct accreditation, and accredited for the specific device or standards that you want certified or tested against.
So in terms of laboratories, as we mentioned, so there is accreditation, there is a region. Should we consider them as our suppliers, like where we are going to do an audit of what they are doing or whatever, or as soon as they are accredited or they are for the right region, we have no kind of authority or to check what they are doing inside?
No, but, well, I know what you're getting at. It's your ISO 1345. You have supplier requirements. So you have to, qualify your supplier. You have to, monitor the performance, and then you do evaluation whether you keep them or not. And a testing lab is providing service to you, right? just like a sterilization company would provide sterilization services to you if you're doing that as a subcontract work. Well, an accredited lab has to meet certain requirements anyway. So their quality management system, similar to testing labs, would be the ISO 17025.
Yeah.
So they are following an operational procedures, being part of an accredited, as being part of a testing accredited lab. I'm getting tongue twisted here. So you have a high confidence that, you know, they are certified to such and such standard, but certainly you want to sort of monitor the performance as well, because it is not uncommon for a testing lab to have issues with their, you know, quality management system per se. They could have a lot of major NCs, non-compliances, that may result to, you know, the activation and validation of their certification as an accredited lab, you see. So it's a good way to sort of check on that once in a while, or at least have some kind of agreement with them if you're going to be using them on a long-term basis as a sole accredited testing lab, that, you know, share your audit results with me, or you can even define what would be acceptable for you. But since it's not frequent enough, that maybe you can do it once a year, maybe just to touch base with them. How's your accreditation status with this country or that region?
Yeah, it's what I was doing. If I remember, in one of my company, we were having kind of a frequency to check the accreditation of laboratories, because they can be accredited tomorrow, but then in 3 weeks they can lose their accreditation, and if we don't check that, they can continue to work for us while they were not accredited, and maybe it can be a non-conformance to our
and a good auditor, ISO 13485 auditor, will probably catch that. Okay. Yeah. So they may want to look at some documents, whether it's the recent certificate, right? As it expired, is the certificate expired already? So yeah, those are the things that you want to be, you know, mindful of, even though you may use it once a year or twice a year, but you know.
Yeah, I had during an audit, I had an auditor that had made that. So we had on our procedure the fact that we are checking the accreditation of the laboratories, and it picked a laboratory and he looked at the website if this laboratory is still accredited or not, and it was fine. But they are doing really the check. They are doing the live check, doing the audit to check that that it's really correct and that we have done a correct job on that. But it's really an important thing, to review, and yeah, you have to put that also on your procedure for that.
Sometimes Munir, checking the test lab's website may not be up to date. Yeah. So what I would recommend, the best way to check the validity of their accreditation is go to the accrediting body. Yeah. So OSHA in the United States, they have a list. If they, you know, taken out accreditation for a testing lab, it would reflect that. And the same thing with NANDO's site. You know, just refresh it to see if you still see certain notified bodies under the MDR or not, or MDD. You know. Yeah,
I will put on the link on the show notes a link of an article I wrote on how to check your accredited laboratories or accredited bodies. So it will be showing you, as Michael mentioned, the website of the accreditation body, and giving you full confidence that this is really the most updated information here.
Right.
Michael, so now that we have selected our laboratory and we know that what we have to do, so usually we are creating some kind of test protocols to say, here is how you should do this, here is how you should do that. So do you think this is something that should be done by the manufacturer, or it's a laboratory who has to do that and to show you what exactly they will do to test your device?
Yes and yes. Remember, I mentioned earlier that in order for you to have a higher success rate to obtain your product safety certification or certification for your device, is during your product design and development, if you can, try to do some of these testing as much as possible, because it will give you, if you need to make adjustments in your design, let's say that you did a leakage current test and it exceeds the limit, at least you can still tweak it before you submit it for formal certificate. It gets expensive when you submit and have to redesign once the test lab. I would rather have you tell me during design and development that I'm failing something, rather than the test lab tell me that I've failed something. It's costly that way. So you have to redesign. You have to, you know, get your samples back or redesign a new sample, and hopefully that one will pass. And it takes a lot of time and expense that way if you're having to deal with the failures once your product's already with the test lab. It's better to capture the failures during your product design and development. At least internally, you would know if you have a high confidence or not before you submit, right? So you would create your own test protocols if you're doing the internal testing, and the test protocols can be generated from the standards themselves. However, you'll probably find it online somewhere, or the testing labs, if they're willing to share it with you, you can use the same test methodology that the test labs are using. If they're willing to, especially if you're saying that you're going to use them for their certification, they may be, nice enough to share with you. But if not, if they're playing hardball with it, you can easily create the test protocols right from the standards. It tells you, the methodology of how to perform it, the pass or fail criteria. So you should be able to create 1-page or 2-page test protocol for each of the tests.
Now,
so
I think
my recommendation is do it internally and try to design it with high pass results before you submit it for formal certification.
No, I think it's good because I suppose if you are also writing yourself the test protocol, you know already what should be done, and you can see if the laboratory can do it also. So it's also important that you are also controlling that what is mentioned in the standard is really done. But I suppose that you can do that the other way around. If the laboratory is doing the test protocol, you can check with the standard that the test protocol they created is really correct and compliant to the standard also. So it should be something that that can help you also to check that they are really doing correctly their job.
Yeah, you can do that, but on the testing lab side, it's pretty much uniform. They're using what they call a TRF or a CB style test report form where they go through a checklist and all the results of the test and so forth. You've probably seen them as part of a technical file for MDD or MDR. So it's pretty much uniform. If you say that a lab is accredited to EN 6601 or IEC 6, then therefore that would entail that they have the capability to test the entire standard. Now, some labs may not be totally equipped to test for things like ingress protection. For example, a standard might say you need an IP rating of 22. So how will you know that? So you have to design your enclosure so that you have an IP rating 22 on your device. So a lab may not have that capability, even though they're accredited to 6601, but IP testing is pretty much universal across different types of product categories, not just medical. So it's one of those miscellaneous tests that a lab may not be equipped to do, but you may have to source it out somewhere else for that specific test.
So in case now that you have also no standard at all existing for the type of test that you want to do, are you allowed to create your own test, or maybe to steal a test example coming from the aeronautics or from another industry than the medical device industry? So is it some kind of good practice also to do for some medical device manufacturers that are here wanting to test something, but there is no specific medical device standard for that?
Well, keep in mind that the nice thing about the introduction of IEC 6601 is the risk management, right? So people forget that you, as the designer and manufacturer of your device, you are the expert of your device, not the test lab, not someone else. You should know more about your risk, to identify your risk and be able to, show mitigation for those risks, right? So that's why the standards should be used as a risk mitigation. So for example, if electric shock is a hazard, then you mitigate that through the leakage current requirements per IEC or EN 6601. So it may not be entirely that you would have to apply the entire 6601 standard, because a certain risk may not be present based on your design, right, of the device. So there may be areas there that may not be applicable. That's why, when people start doing the risk analysis, they easily point to the standard name and title as the risk mitigation. But I think it's worth it to be more specific when you're especially doing a hazard-based analysis, electric shock, then point to a specific requirement in the standard, how you mitigate the electric shock hazard under normal or abnormal condition. Well, how do you determine electric shock hazard? Well, it's based on leakage currents, right? That's why we have patient leakage currents, and then other types of leakage currents that's intended for the operator and the patient. So I don't know if that answered your question, but certainly you should have more freedom with your risk analysis. And you know, just because EN 6601 exists doesn't mean that any active device, electrically powered active device, automatically falls within the standard, or everything within the standards will apply. So you have to really know the content of that standard and be able to use specific requirements to use as a risk mitigation based on the hazards that you identified.
Yeah, the question was more about not using a medical device standard, but using maybe a standard coming from another industry than medical devices, because there is nothing specifically existing within the medical device standard. So is it also a possibility for manufacturers that are a bit lost because they have to test something, and instead of creating the test protocol by themselves, they say, oh, I know that there is this standard from, as I said, the aeronautics, or this standard from another industry that is already fitting with what is the requirement. So do you think that they can go directly to this other standard instead of staying or staying with the medical device standards?
Okay, I understand your question. So, for example, there are no specific harmonized standards that apply to your device. How can you show the safety and effectiveness of your device without any of these state-of-the-art standards available?
Exactly.
Well, certainly you as the manufacturer and the expert of your device, you have that flexibility to choose and be able to substantiate through your documentation and analysis that this will provide the same or greater safety level as any other harmonized standards that may be present for other devices. So yeah, there should be some flexibility, but you have to use your expertise and your knowledge of your device and be able to take whatever that publication is that you're referencing, be able to understand it and correlate it between your device, and then also be able to show and demonstrate that it does provide the same safety level.
No, I think it's correct. And it's really something that a lot of people were asking, oh, I don't find any standard in the medical device industry for that. What should I do? And as you said, the medical device manufacturer are the experts of the device, so they should know what to do or what kind of test they should do. And then they have just to provide, if I can say, justification why they choose this test, how it can really provide safety or prove safety or performance of the device, etc. So I think, yeah, this is something that will be really well welcomed by some manufacturers.
Yeah, you're definitely right on the target there. I think it's based on what everybody else has been doing for decades, that they became accustomed to just follow a standard.
Yeah.
Where in fact that don't automatically say that this standard applies or in its entirety applies to you. And certainly you have that flexibility as an expert, like you said, of your device. So yeah.
I think it's great. Okay, a last point is about manufacturers that are trying to test products. So do you recommend them to test really the final product, the finished product, or to test the components also of the products to prove that really it's a good product? So what is your thinking about testing in terms of finished products or components also?
Well, it depends where you're at in the design and development stage. There are certain tests that you can, depending how far or are you in the development stage, that you can actually test, get an idea what your leakage currents is. So if you already have a power supply in place, the major critical component that contributes to your leakage currents are already in place. Even though you have not finalized your design, you can do some preliminary tests on that to gauge. Maybe that you'll find that throughout the development stages that you may have to add some additional insulating material because you're measuring an excessive amount of leakage at that stage of the design. So yeah, I recommend that whatever you can test during the product stages, the development stages, go ahead and do it. With the EMC, it's a little bit different because your enclosure and your components, internal components, will play a major role in your radiated emissions and susceptibility or immunity. So depending on what test, what standards you're talking about, some you may have to wait till the product is at its final stage of design, but there are tests that you can perform along the way that will give you a good idea whether you're in the right direction. You're going to pass leakage or not, or are you? If you're coming up with your own system or method in lieu of another proven method, maybe you have to test it that way. So yeah, so there's no black and white rule for that. I think it's determined by your knowledge of the product and what requirements you're trying to meet, and where you think you can start, integrating some of the tests throughout the product development stages.
I think it's great because, as you mentioned, it's better maybe to test more and to have good some results that show you if you are on the right direction or not, instead of not doing a lot of tests and then looking at the finished product test and maybe it will fail because you have missed some parameters or some components that you choose were not really the correct ones for your product. So it's really a great one here.
Yeah, and another thing is, I really push this to designers and manufacturers that whatever time investment you put into your product and development in terms of regulatory and standards requirement, it will pay off, because what you want to do is avoid the testing lab telling you what you have failed. That's where the delays, what was quoted 6 weeks to complete your test, it becomes much longer, because what happens, I used to work for a lab where I evaluated medical devices under 6601 and other standards. If I discover a failure, I would put that project aside and move on to my next project until you have addressed and fixed that design before I can start working on your project again. So I have multiple projects that I'm working, so I will put your project in the back burner until you have fixed that problem. So, and then that problem, the fix that you do or propose may not be a guarantee that you'll pass it still. So you may have to go through several reiterations before you can get it right, because I can't consult with you in terms of how to correct the problem. So you might have to seek advice from others who can help you with the design and how to fix the problem. So yeah, do what you can during design and development, and it starts with identifying the requirements that apply to you, implement those requirements within your design, and do some testing along the way, some checkpoints before you think about submitting for a formal certification. So that's the best way to do it.
Great. So thank you for that. Thank you for the advice for those manufacturers. I'm sure they will really appreciate that. So let's talk now a bit more about your company, so medicalregs.com. So what kind of services are you offering, and on which area maybe in the world are you really operating here?
Yeah, well, medicalregs.com, I founded a company, and our thinking is that we want to help MedTech, the MedTech startups, especially those with limited resources and staff, on knowledge base and regulatory and standards. So what we want to do is engage with them as early as possible. We identify the requirements for them, whether it's electrical requirements or materials requirements. Keep in mind that the standards, we go beyond standards, and we have ROS, we have WE directive, we have REACH directives. Anything that may impact your material selection, we identify those. So whatever plastic material, we identify the requirements for those down to the electrical level, and we help them with their QMS 1345. And also we do regulatory services for the US, FDA 510K, PMA, also, of course, the MDD, MDR, and now we're actually offering our services in the ASEAN member states.
Okay.
So, so pretty much across the board, but what we want to really do is help medical device manufacturers to start it off correctly. And the safety and effectiveness of your device starts with your design. Everything else just follows, the regulatory, the procedures, and so forth, the submission, everything follows, but you got to design it right to the requirements first.
I think it's clear. So with a good plan, you will have a better execution. So you should really start well, preparation, and have somebody to help you from the beginning to show you the right way, the right path to follow. And I think it's really great. So don't hesitate to contact Michael regarding through the medicaldevicereg.com. So where can people follow up with you again? So medicalregs.com is one. The website, is there more place?
Yeah. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I try to share a lot of tips for MedTech's tips. That includes what we've just talked about, but in more detail, how to select critical components, what certification marks on components are not equal, things like that. I do a lot of posting and tips, so they can find me there, medicalregs.com.
Okay.
So, or under my name, Michael B. Wetherington. So I'm very active there.
I will put anywhere all those links on the show notes so that people can go and directly pick that and contact you if you have if there is any question to you directly. So I think it's great.
Sure. Yeah. All questions are welcome. And you can either do that through the website. It goes to me automatically. If I'm preoccupied with other things, I'll send it out to some of my engineers or RAs that can answer the questions as well. But primarily I'm on LinkedIn. So customers ask me questions, then I can answer it immediately.
Great. So thank you. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Thank you also.
Great. So thank you for people that are listening to this episode. So thank you for all the messages that I'm receiving on the podcast. So really appreciated. I hope really this will be helping everybody. So don't hesitate to go to the YouTube channel also to subscribe and to provide also some comments. If there is any question, I will forward that directly to Michael. So go also to the podcast. If you are listening that to the podcast, so please just provide a review on the podcast provider. So Apple Podcast or Google Podcast or Spotify, just send me a small message. It's really great because it's helping also for other people that are trying to find the good podcast for them related to medical devices to choose the medical device made easy podcast. So this can help me a lot by doing that. So thank you for that. Okay, Michael. So thank you for your help. Do you have maybe a last word for those medical device manufacturers that are maybe trying to develop their device? So is there kind of a last advice or last tip that you want to provide them?
I do. And thank you for asking me that. And this is really going to help many new medical device company, MedTech startups. It is really important, and I cannot stress this enough, is to create a spreadsheet. Okay. And identify all the regulatory requirements. And I'm not just talking about standards. Look at other agencies, environmental. Look at, lithium-ion battery requirements for air transport, military outfit. You have to put that in one nice spreadsheet so that you can actually see the entire picture. You don't want to miss a beat right before market launch that you have missed a regulatory requirement outside of FDA or the MDR. So that's my first. And you really design those requirements. So you have to understand the requirements and design to them. And that's the best piece of advice. And if you can do that, you'll have a high success rate in passing the safety certification on your device with minimal time and expense.
So great. Thank you, Michael, for this advice. And I hope really this will help a lot of manufacturers. So if you want really to be compliant with your medical device, if you want to place compliant medical device on the market, so please follow those advices because it comes from experts that already went through those routes. So they know exactly what to do there. Okay. So Michael, really thank you for your help. Thank you for all the information here. I really hope this will help a lot of manufacturers, and I wish you a nice day.
Thank you. Thank you, Munir.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.